Here's a question worth thinking about. When did your computer stop feeling like your computer? At some point, most people stopped being users and started being managed. By pop-up notifications, by forced restarts at the worst possible moment, by an operating system that seems more interested in its own agenda than yours. And that slow frustration building quietly in the background is exactly what's pushing millions of people toward a switch they never expected to make. Let's talk about Windows first, because it deserves the most attention. Windows was once the default choice so obvious that nobody questioned it. But something shifted. Over the past few years, Windows has gradually started to feel less like a tool and more like a service one you didn't fully sign up for. Ads appearing inside the Start menu. Updates installing themselves without permission, often right when you need the machine most. Features getting pushed that nobody requested. Telemetry running quietly in the background, collecting data about how you use your own device. And the performance issue is real. A fresh Windows installation feels fast. Give it 6 months of updates and background processes, and that same machine starts dragging. Users aren't imagining it, it's measurable. The trust is eroding. Slowly, but it's happening. macOS is a different story, and a more honest one in some ways. Apple builds a polished, stable experience, but that experience comes locked inside their ecosystem. You pay premium prices not just for hardware, but for the right to upgrade it. Want more RAM or storage? On most Apple machines, that decision was made for you at the factory. Want to use software outside the App Store without jumping through hoops? That's becoming harder by design. Mac is excellent if you're willing to live inside Apple's rules. Many people are, but many others are starting to ask whether those rules are worth the price. This is where Linux comes in. And the first thing worth saying is this. The Linux that lives in people's heads, black screen, cryptic commands, hours of troubleshooting just to connect to Wi-Fi, that version largely doesn't exist anymore. The modern Linux experience in 2026 is genuinely different. You get a clean desktop, a working app store, smooth performance, and an operating system that simply does not get in your way. It boots fast. It doesn't rearrange your interface without asking. It doesn't push notifications designed to upsell you on a subscription. Updates happen on your schedule. And here's the part that surprises people most. It's stable. Not just on day one. After months of use, the system behaves the same way it did when you first set it up. That kind of consistency is harder to find than it should be. For years, gaming was the single strongest argument against Linux. And it was a fair argument. That changed when Valve launched the Steam Deck, a mainstream gaming device running Linux out of the box. Valve built Proton, a compatibility layer that allows Windows games to run on Linux without the developer doing anything special. Suddenly, a massive portion of the Steam library became playable on Linux. In 2026, Linux gaming isn't perfect. There are still titles that don't work, and anti-cheat systems remain a genuine limitation. But the gap has narrowed dramatically. And the direction matters. Linux gaming performance tends to improve over time, while Windows gaming performance tends to quietly degrade with every major update cycle. For a growing number of gamers, that trajectory is enough to make the switch worth it. The most important shift isn't technical, it's who is moving to Linux and why. Developers are switching because they're tired of fighting their operating system just to set up a working environment. Linux gives them native tools, better terminal support, and a system that doesn't interfere with their workflow. Students are switching because Linux runs well on older, cheaper hardware. A laptop that struggles on Windows often runs Linux smoothly, which matters when you're 3 years into a computer science degree and can't afford a new machine. Creators, video editors, designers, writers are switching because they need stability. A system crash the night before a deadline isn't just frustrating. It's a real professional problem. Linux, on the right setup, is remarkably reliable. These aren't niche users, and when they switch, they don't keep it to themselves. They recommend it to friends, colleagues, and classmates. That's how ecosystems shift, not through marketing, but through real people sharing real experiences. Something changed in the broader culture around privacy. People used to accept data collection as the invisible cost of free software. That acceptance is fading. In 2026, more users understand that when a product is free but deeply integrated into your daily life, you are often the product. Windows collects significant amounts of behavioral data by default. That's documented, not speculation. Linux collects nothing by default. There's no telemetry phoning home, no behavioral profiling, no usage data being aggregated somewhere. Your files, your activity, your patterns, they stay on your machine. That's not a small thing. For a growing number of people, that alone is a reason to switch. Here's the practical part, because the biggest barrier to switching isn't the technology, it's the fear of getting it wrong. You don't have to delete Windows to try Linux. Every major Linux distribution can be run alongside your existing system, a setup called dual booting, so you can test it, learn it, and get comfortable without losing anything. Start with a beginner-friendly distribution. Ubuntu, Linux, Mint, and Fedora are the most recommended starting points in 2026, each with active communities, good documentation, and interfaces that feel familiar if you've used Windows or Mac before. Give yourself a few weeks of normal use. Most people find that within a month, their hesitation is gone not because they became experts, but because they realized they didn't need to be. Linux isn't going to replace Windows globally overnight. Technology doesn't move that fast, and habit is a powerful force. But 2026 is different from previous years in one specific way. Switching no longer requires sacrifice. The software is there, the gaming support is there, the community is massive and genuinely helpful. The hardware compatibility has improved dramatically. The reasons not to switch are shrinking. And once a user discovers they have a real alternative, one that performs well, respects their privacy, and doesn't treat them like a monetization opportunity, that knowledge doesn't disappear. They don't go back to tolerating what they used to tolerate. Millions of people will try Linux this year. A significant portion of them will stay. Not because Linux is flawless, but because it treats the person using it like they're actually in charge. And honestly, shouldn't that have been the baseline all along? If this gave you something to think about, drop a comment below. Are you already running Linux, or is 2026 the year you finally make the move? Either way, the conversation is worth having.